Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari Chen, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of Remnants of Filth, also known as Yooeh. We're on volume 2, and this morning it is going to be a little bit of a shorter video, as you don't need an explanation. The point is, it's going to be a shorter video. But, it doesn't matter because, like I said, I'm going to be reading all this weekend, so we will still end right on time, regardless of when the videos are released. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Chapter 40, Peerless Beauty. Yooeh Chun-ching grinned. You asked the right guy, that's for sure. Every year in Chonghua, meddlesome people put out rankings for all sorts of things, and I love to read them. If we're talking the most beautiful maiden 10 years ago, that's got to be Su Yurou. Moshi knew little about women, and he was especially disinterested in those who stayed cloistered in their chambers, yet were known as peerless beauties far and wide. The name Su Yurou was passingly familiar, but he couldn't recall precisely who this woman was. Have you ever seen her? Does she look anything like Hong Shao at all? Yue Chun-ching shook his head back and forth. Miss Su always wears a veil. Very few people know what she looks like. As her junior, of course, I wouldn't have had the chance to see her face either. At this last, he heaved a rather regretful sigh. Did she eventually marry a cold-tempered man, just like the grocer said in the vision? Moshi asked. Yeah, she did. Yue Chun-ching pondered for a moment before he exclaimed. Her husband does have that kind of temper. Was the grocer actually talking about her? Moshi and Murong exchanged glances. Given how easily even Yue Chun-ching recalled this woman, it would surely be a simple matter to find out more. Li Qingqian must have long known her identity, so why hadn't he moved to capture her? Who did she marry? Moshi asked. Yue Chun-ching stared, then smacked his forehead. No way! I thought you two would have known whose wife she is. After I said all that... Fourth uncle, Shizun, you've never read Beauties of Chonghua? Silence. What about Chonghua's wealthiest? Yue Chengqing asked helplessly. Who did she marry? Moshi snapped impatiently. Medicine Master Jiang Fuli. Yue Chengqing was baffled. She's the wife of Chonghua's richest merchant. You two didn't know? Moshi's eyes darkened. No wonder, he thought. The two most inaccessible places in all of Chonghua were Murong Chuyi's artificing workshop and healer Jiang's medicine room. Moshi didn't know much about a Miss Su, but he had heard of Madame Jiang. It was said that this lady was incredibly delicate and remained in seclusion within the Jiang Manor's medicine room year-round to look after her health. She was completely shut off from the turbulent events of the outside world. Li Qingqian must have initially been too cautious to move against the Jiang clan directly, but now that he had fused with his sword vessel, all that remained was his demonic appetite for violence. He was surely going to target the Jiang residents next. At this thought, Moshi rose and glanced at Goo Mahng, who was asleep beneath the porch, surrounded by a cluster of bamboo warriors. I'll pay the Jiang residents a call, he said. Murong, I'll trouble you to look after... A deafening explosion cut him off. Moshi, Murong Chuyi, and Yue Chun-ching all looked up to see, over the walls of the estate, Chonghua's eastern market in raging flames and noxious smoke billowing toward the sky. What happened? Yue Chun-ching stammered in surprise. Let's take a look, Moshi said. Yue Chun-ching quickly nodded and started to follow Moshi. When he turned, however, he saw that Murong Chuyi hadn't moved. He was still seated at the stone table, giving instructions to a bamboo warrior he'd summoned. Yue Chun-ching hesitated. Fourth uncle, are you not coming? Murong Chuyi's eyes flicked over to Goo Mahng. Didn't you hear Shizun ask me to look after the criminal? I can't go, he said mildly. That made sense to Yue Chun-ching, so he left it at that. The moment Moshi and Yue Chun-ching stepped foot outside the grounds of Yue Manor, they were met with droves of commoners. women, children, and the elderly among them, fleeing in a panic. Imperial guards and cultivators attempted to direct the crowd from the sidelines. Go to the Bureau of Public Safety! Everyone, go to the Bureau of Public Safety! The fire in the east roared brighter and brighter, illuminating a great swath in the sky. The Imperial Guards were like shooting stars streaking across the darkness as they mounted their swords to snatch commoners out of the sea of flame. Although Mo-xi and Yue Cheng-ching were still far off, they could hear the wailing sobs of the victims and shouts of cultivators. Capture him! Bring in reinforcements! Capture the demon! Needless to say, that demon could be no other than the sword demon, Li Qingqian. Yue Cheng-ching was shocked. Why did Li Qingqian start his rampage here instead of going straight to Jiang Manor? Mo-xi suspected that perhaps Li Qingqian had gone to Jiang Manor, but hadn't found the person he sought. Let's head to the Eastern Market first. They rushed forward. Upon their arrival, they discovered that the situation was even worse than they had anticipated. The whole marketplace had been set alight with demonic fire. The scarlet flames bloomed like colossal peonies, and thick smoke curled up into the sky. As they watched, a few cultivators rode swords out of the inferno carrying grievously wounded civilians. The fire's spreading! Quick, put it out! If this goes on, the fire-blocking barrier won't hold up. The crowd was in chaos. The troops stationed in the imperial capital had rushed over to assist, and the soldiers from the Northern Frontier Army were present as well. Men who had originally belonged to the Wang Bao army happily called out, General Mo, when they spied Mo-xi. Others whispered, He's here. Stepdad's here. All these years later, the Wang Bao army still liked to call Mo-xi stepdad in private. The old moniker, born of resentment, had, with time, become a harmless joke. Stepdad strode toward them through the smoke, his robes, black trimmed with gold, billowing behind him. His dark eyes flashed with a reflection of the Eastern Market's tempestuous flames. Dad, General Mo, there's an evil spirit making mischief here. Mo-xi nodded. You focus on getting these civilians out, he said. I'll take care of the rest. The crowd of cultivators was somewhat shocked, unsure what their dad was about to attempt. Mo-xi was a fire-type cultivator. Could he even extinguish flames? They were on the verge of despair when they heard Mo-xi's steady voice. Tuntian, come. A clarion whistle pierced the air like a whale's call ringing through the abyssal ocean. A lustrous white scepter appeared in Mo-xi's palm. Its finial was woven from gold and silver, and it was inlaid with a dazzling precious spirit stone imbued with the soul of a whale, which shone with a magnificent blue light. Yue Cheng-ching was shocked. Was this Tuntian's physical weapon form? Tuntian was Mo-xi's most powerful holy weapon. In most cases, a spoken command was sufficient to wield earth-shaking power. Because Tuntian was too strong, Mo-xi usually only employed it to conjure a defensive barrier. He rarely summoned Tuntian as a scepter. The logic behind this was simple. Defense only required the giant whale's spiritual form. But when the scepter was called, it was to cast spells. Gripping the scepter with slender, pale fingers, Mo-xi pointed it at the soaring field of flame. Rain transformation. A young cultivator gasped. Holy shit! How could a fire-type cultivator extinguish fire? Even if he wasn't a real dad, their stepdad was real goddamn scary. A beam of blue light burst from the tip of the scepter and shot straight into the sky, where it transformed into a colossal whale. With a stroke of its tail, it rushed open-mouthed toward the fire. A fierce gale instantly swirled to life, lifting sand and pebbles into the air. Many of the cultivators on the scene couldn't bear this surge of spiritual energy and fell to their knees one after another, pain written plainly on their faces. Even Yue Cheng-ching coughed repeatedly and squinted his eyes, completely disoriented. The massive cerulean whale clashed with the rollicking sea of fire. Plumes of foam and furious gusts of wind came forth one after another as waves and flames surged for 100 miles. In an instant, the dark night lit up, bright as day. A deluge of rain thundered down to soak the entire breadth of Chonghua's capital. Morsi's face was pale as precious jade amid the torrential rain. Blue light and red fire chased each other through his eyes as his black imperial leathers whipped in the wind. In the blink of an eye, the fire succumbed to the waves, the tongues of the flame beaten back like 1,000-strong cavalry in retreat. The inferno subsided into a smoldering wreck, unable to flare up or dance any longer. Those cultivators lucky enough to personally witness this feat stared at Morsi's back, too shocked to stammer out a single word. Each harbored different feelings in their reeling hearts. One cultivator thought, "Oh God, the women of Chonghua are going to go even crazier over this man." The female cultivators thought. The cultivators of Wang Ba army thought, "Our stepdad is way too powerful. He's so scary when he's mad." In the heart of the ruins, surrounded by roiling curls of smoke, a figure slowly turned. Li Qingqian had indeed been the source of the flames. At this moment, demonic chi suffused his face. His eyes were scarlet, as if they crawled with thousands of red spiders, and his features looked more twisted and deranged than ever. Morsi could no longer see any trace of the benevolent blade parting water, Li Zongshi, in his countenance. The character and temperament of sword demons were largely overpowered by those of their weapons' owners. Li Qingqian's consciousness had been completely drowned by the guoshi of the Liao kingdom. He noticed Morsi and bared his teeth. "Morsi," he cried, "you've protected Chonghua today, but can you protect it always? Can you guard this city without sleep for eternity? Hand over that Su bitch, or I'll give Chonghua no peace." "Aha!" Chuhn-ching exclaimed. "It wasn't so easy to break into the Jiang residence, so now you've taken innocent lives to stir up trouble out here. How shameless!" Li Qingqian threw back his head and laughed. "I'm shameless. Isn't that Su bitch the shameless one? The calamitous beauty who doomed so many girls to be buried on the mountain. But now she's holed herself up and lets the city burn while she cowers in Jiang Manor, unwilling to show her face." Hongshao. Hongshao died for nothing, all because she resembled this woman. A filthy bitch. A fucking coward. There were healers from the Jiang residence among the cultivators on the ground. When they heard Li Qingqian's words, one of them couldn't help but lose his temper. "Nonsense! Our family's madam cultivates in seclusion away from outside influences. By no means is she the kind of person you describe. Wash out your filthy mouth." "She's not that kind of person? Then what kind of person is she?" Li Qingqian cackled. "I'm dying to see what kind of devastating beauty she is to be worthy of the guoshi's infatuation." "You're unfit to appear in front of our madam," the healer replied angrily. "Madam? What madam? She's just a bitch." Li Qingqian ranted madly, his words dripping poison like the fangs of a venomous snake. "I must see what this woman looks like. I'll ruin her face and toss her at the feet of the Liao Kingdom guoshi." As he spoke of this man, the distorted malevolence of his features flared, more vivid than the raging inferno. "That beast! In front of that infatuated fool, I will tear her to pieces and rip her beauty to shreds. He killed my Hongshao, so I'll give the woman he loves a life worse than death." His howls pierced the sky, his voice strained to the limit with emotions ready to burst. "Be careful," Morsi warned those around him. Li Qingqian's body was emanating black chi that coiled around his body in great spirals. In anticipation of another outburst of insanity, Morsi took a step forward, his Chun-tian scepter blazing. The others drew their long brows, ready to let loose a rain of arrows. At that very moment, a sigh as light as smoke drifted over from the far end of the street. "Stop." The new voice was pleasant and mellifluous. Even without seeing the speaker, it was obvious that these words came from the lips of a peerless and enchanting beauty. Everyone jumped and turned their heads, and the crowd parted, leaving a clear path. At the end of it stood a figure shrouded in snow-white silk. A gauze veil obscured her features, and she held aloft an oil paper umbrella made of black bamboo that shielded her from the faint drizzle. Like the Luo River goddess rising from the water, she stepped forward. Li Tingtian's pupils contracted. The healers from Jiang Manor were aghast. "Madam, why have you come?" one of them exclaimed. "Madam, it's too dangerous. If you were to come to any harm, how would we answer to Master when he returns?" "If not for the message from Yooeh Manor, I would not have known of such a serious event," Madame Jiang said. "How long were you planning to keep this from me?" As she spoke, she walked with steady steps toward the sword demon Li Tingtian. Yue Chengqing's jaw dropped in astonishment. "Yue Manor?" Ha! The fourth uncle probably told her, he realized. The thought made him vaguely uneasy. Everyone said his fourth uncle was cold-blooded and indifferent, that he lacked a moral compass and cared only for outcomes. Yue Chengqing knew there was truth behind those sentiments. Fourth uncle had evidently summoned Madame Jiang because he wanted her to bring an end to Li Tingtian's madness. Although this tactic was highly likely to achieve the desired result, it had pushed Madame Jiang into the inferno. The ignorant immortal has never questioned the cost of attaining his goals. Even if the price was the life of a family member, he wouldn't think twice. Such was Chonghua's opinion of Murong Chuyi. Yue Chengqing deeply disliked hearing such words. In his eyes, his fourth uncle was a man of careful consideration who acted in accordance with his own principles. Yet, such impartial consideration was, at heart, inherently cruel. Madame Jiang stopped before Li Tingtian and gazed serenely at him. "You're—" Light flashed in Li Tingtian's pupils. "You're Su Yurou?" "I am indeed," Madame Jiang said. "You sought me out in order to take revenge on the Liao Kingdom's Guoshi. Isn't that right?" "Yes." Li Tingtian clenched his jaw. "I need to see what you look like. I must see the face that doomed all those girls from Maiden's Lament Mountain to be buried alive." Everyone expected Madame Jiang to refuse. She fell silent for a moment, then surprised them all. "Since you want to see my face, I'll let you look. It's just that—" "Just that what?" "There's something I want to tell you first," Madame Jiang said. "But aside from you, I don't want anyone else to hear. It doesn't concern them." Li Tingtian looked her up and down, as if trying to determine whether she was hiding any demon-suppressing weapons. In the end, he spat out, "I'm not afraid of your tricks. If you lie to me, I'll gouge out your heart, tear it in half, and eat—" "I've brought nothing with me besides this umbrella," Madame Jiang said. "But I'm afraid your mind will break down completely after you hear this. You may not be able to bear it. Think carefully about whether you wish to know." Li Tingtian stared, then broke out into laughter. "You needn't try to provoke me. Just speak." "Then come closer," Madame Jiang said. And so the crowd looked on as Li Tingtian tilted his head to listen and Madame Jiang leaned toward him. Beneath the drifting veil, her mouth moved slightly as she spoke. Li Tingtian's expression of deranged malevolence froze. By the time Madame Jiang straightened up to gaze at him calmly, the cold light in his eyes and the utter shock on his face had dumbfounded the onlookers. "What did she say to him?" someone whispered. "I don't know." Li Tingtian looked at Madame Jiang as if she were a ghost. After a long while, he took a step back, his face deathly pale. "No, it can't be. How could it be?" "Not one word I spoke was a lie," Madame Jiang said. There was a beat of silence. Li Tingtian suddenly howled like his heart had been torn out. "You're lying! You bitch! You liar! You made it up! You—" "Didn't you want to see my face? After you see it, you'll know whether I made it up or not." Madame Jiang stepped closer to Li Tingtian. From this angle, no one could see her features save for Li Tingtian himself. She raised her pale and supple fingers to lift her veil. There was no sound whatsoever, a silence as though they had sunk into a deep sea. Then a wail rang out like a snapped teen string. You really—" "Do you believe me now?" Madame Jiang asked. "Your hatred was misplaced all along." Li Tingtian stumbled a few steps away, threw his head back, and burst into maniacal laughter. Ridiculous. Aren't I truly ridiculous? All along, I believed. I actually believed. Fury tore through his heart. His wishes were smashed to bits. Under the onslaught of these emotions, he doubled over and spit out a mouthful of dark blood. Teeth stained black, his knees buckled, and he sat heavily on the ground. His entire being seemed to have been shattered. He laughed through his tears, then pointed at Madame Jiang. So, so that's what it was. He cackled, his chest heaving violently and his eyes a terrifying red. Madame Jiang said nothing. Now I know. The guosher's reasons were actually... Li Qingqian didn't finish the sentence. His pupils contracted, and black blood dripped from his lips. Arching his neck to laugh again, he harshly cried out. How absurd! How utterly absurd! What a joke. I hated for so long, all in vain, all for nothing. The sword demon knelt with his face upturned, wailing in anguish. He let out one cry after another, each one more miserable and tormented than the last. In the end, he crumpled to the ground, spasming as black tea engulfed him. Li Qingqian raised one hand to block out the sky. He mumbled, choking on sobs. All in vain. His obsession was released. He lay on the ground, and his mad laughter slowed and died in his throat. There was a rattle like the calls of a dying cow, which slowly softened into a rasp. At last, he lay curled on the ground like the awkward finale of a cruel joke. Nobody could have imagined that a mere handful of words from Madame Jiang, a mere glimpse of her face, would unravel the obsession that had consumed this sword demon for a lifetime. He had seethed with killing intent only minutes ago, yet now he melted into a puddle of foul blood. Just like that, Li Qingqian dissolved away. How could he... What the... The crowd lapsed into silence. Everyone stared at Madame Jiang in astonishment, as if trying to penetrate her veil and pry out her secrets. What kind of story had fluttered from this woman's red lips into Li Qingqian's ears? Those scant few words had ruthlessly overpowered the supernatural weapon and taken his life. Exactly what had Madame Jiang said to the sword demon? At the center of these stunned gazes, Madame Jiang was tranquil, as if nothing unusual had happened. She glanced at the dissipating sword demon's body, then let down the veil on her bamboo hat and slowly turned around. Madam, his resentment is gone, Madame Jiang said. He won't be able to take human shape again. I apologize for troubling everyone today. My guilt and shame are immense. She bowed her head in obeisance to the assembled cultivators. Regarding the damage to the Eastern Market, I'll tell my husband when he returns, and we will make reparations as soon as possible. She paused. If you'll please excuse me. She glanced at the servants from her own manor. All of you, come with me. There was an uneasy silence. Let's go. It's over. But madam, let's go. Her elegant silhouette strode into the distance, graceful as a stilt walker. As she left, the crowd's eyes remained fixed on her in fascination or astonishment. Within the soaked and ruined Eastern Market, some looked vacantly at her diminishing figure, while others wept over their burnt and broken homes. And then there were those who stared spellbound at the pool of blood that was all that was left of Li Qingqian. Just how beautiful is she? Yue mumbled. Why did Li Qingqian's obsession dissolve when he saw her? Is Madame Jiang that much more beautiful than Hongsha? Moshi said nothing. He stared, frowning, at the grisly puddle on the ground. He knew the truth couldn't be so simple. Madame Jiang's ability to break Li Qingqian's obsession definitely wasn't because of her beauty. There must have been something more. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said that his hatred was all in vain. What was it that he had hated in vain? Cheng noticed his expression and ventured tentatively. Shee Jun. Mo Shi shook his head. Everyone has their own secrets. If it's not necessary to know, then there's no reason to pursue this. Oh, okay. Return to Yue Manor. I'll report to His Imperial Majesty. Cheng acquiesced, but as he turned to leave, he saw something in the periphery of his vision that made him stop in his tracks. He walked up to a little house that had been in a path of the flames. This dwelling was humble and in a state of despair. It was obvious at first glance that it didn't belong to a rich family. Yet, on its window was a spiritual talisman that gleamed with gold. The Yue clan's talisman of indestructibility. On closer inspection, Cheng saw that this house wasn't unique. Many of the surrounding structures bore the exact same talisman. Although these houses had been severely damaged by the fire, the talisman's protection had very likely prevented them from being completely devoured by the flames and allowed their inhabitants to be rescued. But Cheng reached up to take the depleted spiritual talisman between two fingers, his brow furrowed lightly. How strange. The talisman of indestructibility was the most expensive one his family sold. When the rapist was going around, everyone had wanted to buy one, but few could afford it. His paternal uncle even had to repel a few cultivators who had stirred up a fuss, while his fourth uncle hadn't bothered to respond at all. So who then? Who had given them out? As he turned the question over in his mind, Cheng thought of someone. A frail and sickly silhouette as pale as a lotus root, sitting on a wooden wheelchair with a blanket spread over his lap. Jiang Yue. That's right. Jiang Yue had always been overly sensitive. He was an invalid who couldn't even take care of himself, but somehow his heart was still too soft for his own good. The talismans of indestructibility affixed to these destitute homes were likely his handiwork, gifted to the poor. Cheng felt some discomfort at this thought. On one hand, he felt that the dispassionate ways of his fourth uncle and father were rather cruel, but on the other hand, he had heard hundreds of derisive comments about Jiang Yue ever since he was small. People said that Jiang Yue didn't possess any particular talent, that he did nothing but sell out the Yue clan's secret techniques in order to suck up to others and bolster his own reputation. But if Jiang Yue hadn't given these people talismans of indestructibility out of kindness, then how many more innocent lives would have been lost in the Eastern market today? Cheng was conflicted. He had no idea what to think. The incessant noise around him disturbed his thoughts, making them even more confused and unclear. He thought vaguely. This time, between fourth uncle and Jiang Yue, could it be that fourth uncle was wrong? Chapter 41. Cohabitation. Although the immediate crisis with Li Tingtian was over, Morsi knew in his heart that this matter was far from resolved. While everyone on the streets was busy trying to guess what exactly Madame Jiang had said to the sword demon, Morsi had realized, from all the other details, that this was only the tip of the iceberg. However, he had said it himself. Everyone had their own secrets, Morsi included. He could easily imagine himself in Madame Jiang's shoes, and thus had no desire to make trouble for no reason and dig up her past. Besides, there was the matter of Goo Mahng. The emperor had said that whoever dealt with the real culprit of these heinous crimes would become Goo Mahng's rightful handler. However, Li Tingtian's obsession had ultimately been dispelled by Madame Jiang's mysterious words. Neither Shih nor Wangshu had anything to do with it. The emperor was deeply vexed. Do we have to give Goo Mahng to Jiang Manor? We can't afford to keep him, said the representative sent by the unimaginably wealthy Jiang Manor. We don't have any food to spare. We don't want him. And so the emperor thought. It was Murong Chuyi who had summoned Madame Jiang, so why not give Goo Mahng to Murong Chuyi? Murong Chuyi's response was only 2 words. I'm broke. The emperor was so angry he collapsed back onto his throne in a huff. These 2 families, one selling medicine and one crafting magical implements, were the 2 wealthiest clans in Chonghua. But now neither was willing to take Goo Mahng, obviously because they were reluctant to insert themselves into the conflict between Wangshu and Shih. In the end, the emperor couldn't avoid making a decision that was bound to offend at least one party. After careful consideration, he at last decreed that Morsi could take the man back to his manor. The beast of the altar would be moving to a new den after all. So, it was that Morsi returned to Yooeh Manor to retrieve Goo Mahng. Upon his arrival, he saw Murong Chuyi standing by the well with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the flowers falling. His white clothes shone like moonlight, and his silhouette was graceful, but his expression was indifferent. His gaze swept over Morsi without any perceptible emotion. He simply said, "He's in the bedroom on the east side." Morsi nodded in thanks. As he was taking his leave, Murong Chuyi called out to stop him. "Shihajun, wait." "What is it?" Murong Chuyi considered briefly before responding. "Has Shihajun ever doubted whether Goo Mahng has truly lost his memories?" A pause. "Why do you ask?" "Last night, when I went to the room to check on him, I heard him talking in his sleep," Murong Chuyi replied. This wasn't the first time such a thing had happened. In the prison, when Goo Mahng had been unconscious, he had mumbled, "I want a home," as he lay unconscious. But Morsi's heart still stuttered. He forced himself to remain composed as he asked, "Is that so? What did he say?" "A name. Loo John-shing," Murong Chuyi said. Morsi was silent, but his hands curled into fists and his knuckles went white. Loo John-shing was an old friend of Goo Mahng's and one of the direct causes of Goo Mahng's treasonous defection. Even though Morsi had known that Loo John-shing only liked pretty women, he and Goo Mahng had been so inseparable that Morsi had never warmed up to him. Now, hearing that Goo Mahng had called Loo John-shing's name in his sleep, his chest inevitably grew tight with frustration. He even felt a little dizzy. But he would never let his discomfort show on his face. So, even though his blood ran cold, he only nodded his head and said gravely, "Quite suspicious." "These are likely just a few scraps of memory," Murong Chuyi said, "but you should keep your guard up if you're taking him into your manor. After all, he was an agent of the Liao Kingdom. If his memory loss is actually cover for some scheme, I fear that the disaster he will bring will be far more serious than Li Qingqian's." There was really no need for Murong Chuyi to tell him this. Morsi was already deeply concerned. He wanted to get to the bottom of it as soon as possible, both for the sake of Chonghua and his own selfish reasons. Accompanied by Murong Chuyi, Morsi entered the eastern bedroom. He pushed open the door, only to discover the room was empty. Its only occupant was a bamboo warrior standing stupidly by the bed. Morsi's expression darkened at once. Where'd he go? The bamboo warrior pointed to the floor beneath the bed. They looked and found that Goo Mahng was indeed crouched under the bed, fully alert and wary, his blue eyes glinting as he watched them. When he caught sight of Morsi and Murong Chuyi, he snarled, "What you looking at?" Okay. Oh God. I have a little note here that just says, "OMG, so adorable." He's hiding under the bed. Okay. Returning to the reading. Morsi blinked. I'm sorry. Okay. "Get him out of there," Murong Chuyi commanded the bamboo warrior. The construct moved its creaky joints, rattling as it got to the floor and squirmed beneath the bed. But why would Goo Mahng sit there waiting to be caught? As the bamboo warrior tried to grab him, he kicked its hand aside and scuttled out, launching himself off the floor with one arm to sprint for the door. But less than 2 steps in, he thumped into a solid chest. "Come back with me," Morsi said, glowering. Goo Mahng had initially had a decent impression of this person, but the last few times they'd met, this man had either hit him or tied him up. Goo Mahng had been completely helpless against him. Even the sigil on his neck was of no use. Of course he didn't want to listen to Morsi. Goo Mahng shot him a glare and aimed his vicious kick at him. Morsi grabbed Goo Mahng's ankle without even looking. His face grew stormier yet. "You've already tried this kick. You sure you want to do it again?" "Move," said Goo Mahng. His other foot arced through the air as he tried to pivot off Morsi and kick him over. But How could he know that Morsi was so familiar with his moves, even when he switched his second strike? The moment Goo Mahng leapt up, Morsi dodged to the side and elbowed Goo Mahng in the knee, killing his momentum. With a single swift movement, he had Goo Mahng slung over his shoulder. Goo Mahng was unable to escape, but he still refused to concede. "Let me go!" he shouted. Morsi had much on his mind. What with the scepter of Loo John-shing and the possibility that this was an elaborate plot on Goo Mahng's part, Goo Mahng's attempt at resistance only stoked his fury. All that held him back was the fact that they were within Yooeh manor. He restrained his feelings with an expression of displeasure. He asked Murong Chuyi, "Do you have any rope?" "It's no good for tying him up." "I don't need to tie him up." "Then what do you mean to do?" "Shut him up." Murong Chuyi made no comment. Of course, he would never perform such a task himself, and Morsi didn't have a free hand, so they could only prevail upon the bamboo warrior for assistance. The warrior blankly raised his hands and stopped in front of Goo Mahng. The next time Goo Mahng opened his mouth, the cloth strip was neatly shoved between his teeth and tied at the back of his head. This kind of gag looked extremely suggestive, but Murong Chuyi had no relevant experience and thus saw nothing inappropriate about it. He calmly said, "Shee Hujun, take care." So, Morsi carried Goo Mahng out over his shoulder, completely unaware of the bamboo warrior's masterpiece. Only when he tossed Goo Mahng into the carriage did he discover that he had been tied up like that. He could only stare, blank-eyed, and murmur unthinkingly, "You..." Goo Mahng could neither speak nor fully close his mouth. The coarse cloth was caught between his teeth, and his hands had been bound behind him. His eyes glared daggers at Morsi, but he could neither curse nor move. He could only pant as he lay on the mat within the carriage's curtains, clothes in disarray. Morsi's eyes darkened, and it wasn't his fault that the sight called to mind some improper events. His Gushishong had always been tough. He was never one to easily shed tears from sadness or pain, but it was a different story in bed. Goo Mahng had always been sensitive, so he would cry reflexively from strong stimulation. He had helplessly explained this to Morsi before. "Don't think I'm crying because I'm unhappy. I honestly can't control it." What he meant was, "You haven't really fucked your guga to tears. It's just that I thought this body was made of sterner stuff." At the time, Morsi hid his smile and had said, "Yes, I understand." In reality, Morsi loved to watch Goo Mahng cry in bed, especially when he stubbornly and desperately tried to hold back tears, but still ended up sobbing. He loved to watch Goo Mahng's eyes, delicately slender at the ends, and his lips, soft and warm, as tears streamed down his flushed cheeks and into the hair at his temples. In these moments, Morsi knew for sure that in actuality, this fierce and dauntless beast, his invincible Goo Mahng, also had weaknesses that made him flinch when touched. Morsi had once been so adoringly infatuated with his Shushong in his bed. Even all these years later, the mere thought of that Goo Mahng of the past was enough to convince Morsi that he'd experienced the pinnacle of pleasure. From that point on, he had never been able to appreciate the sight of another's face. And right now, Goo Mahng looked exactly the way he did in those days when they had been passionately in love, tightly restrained by the cloth rope, his mouth wet and his eyes teary, those glossy blue eyes damp as a storm cloud. Surely trouble lay ahead. Old habits die hard. As if scalded by this haze of steam, Morsi turned sharply away. His terrifying desire stunned and shamed him. How could he feel such ravenous hunger and tenacious yearning for a traitor? Everything he had done with regard to Goo Mahng thus far had certainly stemmed not from desire, but from a need to settle their old debts of passion and hatred. How could he long for and succumb to Goo Mahng's body once again? But a certain part of Morsi had stiffened against his will, growing so hot it seemed to burn. He had remained unmoved by carnal pleasures all these years. This hadn't happened since Goo Mahng left. He was involuntarily reminded of their past trysts when they were tucked inseparably close, skin against skin, when he used to have Goo Mahng pinned beneath him, biting his ear and bullying him relentlessly. Goo Mahng would always huffily say, "Your Goo Mahng isn't so fragile. You can go deeper." Yet Goo Mahng always collapsed in the end, sobbing as he cried. "Enough, Shudi, that's too much. You're too big. I can't take it anymore." But it wasn't that Goo Mahng couldn't take it anymore. It was that neither of them could endure any more of this mutual torment, this raging inferno of love and lust. Even now, the memory of that pleasure yet lingered. Morsi cursed under his breath and tossed one of the carriage cushions over Goo Mahng's face. He turned to look out the window, and the journey passed in silence. The carriage came to a stop at his manor. "My lord, we're here," said the coachman from outside. Morsi had originally planned to tote Goo Mahng outside just like this, but upon removing the cushion and getting another eyeful of Goo Mahng's face, he quickly threw the cushion down again. He didn't want anyone else to see Goo Mahng the way he looked right now, not even the coachman. Morsi tapped Goo Mahng's acupoints to render him unconscious and loosened the rope. With a stormy expression, he hauled him out of the carriage. A chilly voice came unexpectedly from behind him. "Ooh, Shihujun, that was fast." Morsi unconsciously drew Goo Mahng deeper in his arms, then realized this was inappropriate and pushed him away again. Moo-wrong Lian, pipe in hand, shot him a fluid glance. Morsi suppressed his rage and took another breath. "What are you doing at my manor?" he said coldly. "Just passing by." "Then keep moving. I won't see you off." "You—" Moo-wrong Lian's peach blossom eyes narrowed, and he gritted his teeth. "You asshole, just you wait. You wanted to shelter this evil beast, but you're sure to regret it." It was hard to say if Morsi would regret it or not, but it was going to be troublesome, certainly. From the moment he'd walked out of the palace, Morsi had been thinking about how to deal with Goo Mahng. Letting him live in luxury was out of the question, but consigning him to wait upon others like Moo-wrong Lian had done wasn't an option either. Morsi still hadn't thought of a suitable resolution by the time he returned to his manor. Once he was back in his own study, Morsi closed his eyes to rest. The attendant came to change the candles, but Morsi stalled him as he turned to leave. "Yooeh, don't go yet. There's a matter I'd like to speak to you about." Although Yooeh was a long-winded and gossipy chatterbox, he had an ironclad sense of loyalty and a formidable boldness. He was always quick with new ideas and never failed to handle matters with utmost care. But sometimes, like right now, for example, he was Morsi's clueless enabler. "My lord." The enabler replaced the lampshade and bowed. "Please ask away, my lord. This one is all ears." "Say," Morsi muttered, "if someone were to feign mental impairment, under what conditions might they most easily be exposed?" Yooeh was momentarily stumped. "Why can't you just say you haven't given up, that you still want to see if Goo Mahng is pretending?" he thought to himself. "Isn't this question a little too obvious?" But everyone knew that Morsi was proud and haughty. If Yooeh exposed his little scheme, this young general would sulk in silence for days. Yooeh had no choice but to pretend to be completely oblivious. If they were deliberately faking it, they would surely have their guard up at all times. It would be hard to catch someone like that in a lie, like a wild and wary beast. They would sniff for danger before each step they took. It would be practically impossible for them to fall into a trap. Morsi nodded. Continue. "My lord should let nature take its course. Since they'll naturally be constantly on guard, you must constantly test them," Yooeh suggested. "What do you mean?" Morsi asked after a brief pause. "Put him to work." An abacus of laziness began to tick away in Yooeh's heart. Make him do the laundry and chop the firewood, cook and clean, have him sleep, eat, bathe, practice martial arts. In short, find things for him to do. The more tasks he must complete, the more details he might expose to you, my lord. If you only set a single trap, a wild beast might manage to avoid it, but if you set traps everywhere, he'll eventually stumble and fall in. Morsi looked at him without replying. In this grave silence, Yooeh began to doubt himself. Did Shihajun realize that Li Wei wanted to train a competent helper and thus slack off? But at that moment, Morsi turned away from Li Wei to face the window. All right, we'll do as you suggested. But the sight of this person irritates me. You handle it. If Li Wei were stupider than he was, he would agree and say, Okay, Shihajun, this one will immediately go handle it. But the enabler Li Wei was clearly not stupid. He continued to feign ignorance and blankly asked, Ah? Of whom does Shihajun speak? Handle whom? Morsi came back to his senses with an awkward cough. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Li Wei humbly awaited Morsi's instruction. It's Goo Mahng, Morsi said. I've already brought him back and knocked him unconscious. He's still asleep inside my room right now. I've left him alone for the time being. See about finding him a place to sleep and some tasks for him to do. Li Wei was stunned at first. Someone else was allowed to sleep in the Lord's bedroom? He thought. Wasn't he a major clean freak? But after turning it over in his head a few times, he quickly understood. His lord had once marched and fought alongside Goo Mahng. Back then, neither of them had made a name for themselves, and they must have lived in humble accommodations. They likely had to make do and sleep in the same tent. So, it wasn't so improper for Goo Mahng to sleep in his lord's bed now. After coming around to this idea, Li Wei sighed. He inwardly rolled his eyes and thought disgruntled. Before you even walked through the door, everyone had already heard that you fought with Wang Shujuan and dragged the beast of the altar back to your den. Who do you think you're fooling? But he adopted an expression of alarm. Ah, it's that Goo? Yes, Goo Mahng. Morsi impatiently replied. When did you become a stutterer? Yes, Goo Mahng. In another lifetime, Li Wei was surely destined for the stage. Oh my goodness, not him! Who in Chonghua doesn't know he's a fighter? Wouldn't this be a death sentence upon the subordinate? Morsi paused. I have already placed an alarm sigil on him, he said. If there is any aberration in his spiritual energy, I'll know at once. There's no need to worry. Go on. Li Wei confirmed his instructions and thanked Morsi in every possible way, until the fingers with which Morsi was massaging his forehead gradually balled into a fist. Only at this point did Li Wei say obsequiously, Yes, then this subordinate will bravely go forth. Morsi had already lost all patience. He dismissed Li Wei with a wave of his hand. Hurry up and get out. Li Wei gladly slipped away. Wasting no time, he flagged down the other attendants and began to arrange Goo Mahng's new life at Shih-he Manor. Alrighty, everyone. So that is going to conclude the reading for today, given the time that I had in trying to release on time today, actually. So let's just go over a few things really quickly. First off, we have a new character, Yurou, which at this current moment we don't have any more on her other than coming out to handle Li Qingxian, which I must say was quite the interesting thing to see. But even before that, we have the powerful display that Morsi showed using Chuhn-ching, which I have to say was amazing because it said that it was able to shoot out at a 100-mile radius to get rid of this demonic fire. Like, that is some freaking power. What? He really is scary. I'm like, dang, I don't think I'd ever want to be on Morsi's bad side. Anyway, nevertheless, we have Yurou coming out, and whatever she said and whatever she looks like completely just dissolved Li Qingxian. But even I knew, and Morsi thought it to himself, like, okay, this is still far from over. Because here's the thing, the Guosher is still out there. So the question is, who is exactly this Guosher from the Liao Kingdom? Where is he? What is he doing? And what other nefarious plans does he have just in general? Because clearly he's going to play an important part in something. And so I'm just wondering, like, what is that something going to be? Also, we have, them finding out that it was actually Murong Chuyi who sent for Madame Jiang to come out. And honestly, I don't think it was cruel. I think that was exactly what needed to be done because you're the one he's looking for. Not saying that she's held responsible for anything, but you're the one he's looking for. And it's not like Shihajun would actually let her get hurt, or anyone else, any of the other Northern Frontier soldiers would let her get hurt. So it was nice to see just, that whole thing play out, which, by the way, I want to let you guys know that her name means jade or soft. So there we have that peerless beauty who is reclusive and finally came out just for this one moment. She seems like a pretty decent lady because, as she said to her servants, like, hey, if you guys never said, like, you guys didn't say anything to me. So it sounds like if she had known earlier, she would have come out earlier. Um, Anyway, then I love this moment that we had with Cheng at the end of chapter 40, with him basically thinking maybe he needs to reevaluate, and if maybe not the whole scenario between him and Jiang Yeshui, but reevaluating this particular situation of, okay, was my fourth uncle, wrong for being so indifferent? And was Jiang Yeshui right? So it's just nice for him to have a moment of reflection, to have some other thought towards Jiang Yeshui other than like, oh, he sucks. But seeing that, no, he possibly is in the right here. Because something like that is not necessarily easy to deal with the upbringing that he had of constantly being told that Jiang Yeshui is no good. It makes perfect sense for him to have these thoughts in his mind because it was indoctrinated into him. So I would love to see how his perspective on Jiang Yeshui is going to morph over time. But first, we need Jiang Yeshui to, like, appear on the scene again. Go ahead and come out. Come out wherever you are. So then we have Yay. Finally, Moshi is in Goo Mahng's arms. I mean, Goo Mahng is in Moshi's arms. He's in his manor. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Just messing it all up, right? And there still is this suspicion that Goo Mahng has his memories, especially after what Murong told him of whispering this friend's name, who apparently is the one who really sent him over into his treason. So we have another character who is off the scene, just like Jiang Yeshui, who we need to learn more about to see what part they play in this whole story. But anyway, I agree with Li Wei's solution to see if, okay, did the guy really lose his memories or not? Yes, work him to the bone. Let him become physically exhausted and maybe even mentally, depending on what he's doing, because then if he is faking, he will trip up and you will know. That was a very smart idea. So let's just see how this is going to play out. Also, I know I'm all over the place, but it was so cute when Goo Mahng was hiding under the bed before he got captured. And we're not even going to talk about Moshi seeing him tied up and him getting hard. We're not going to talk about it. I'm just going to mention it, and then we're going to move on with our lives. I'm excited to see what these next chapters are going to be, because clearly we have it where Goo Mahng had once trusted Moshi, at least to some extent, because he was nicer to him. But like it said, he was like, I don't know, after these last few times, like, Moshi's been kind of mean to me. So he was like, I don't want to go with this guy. So it'll be interesting to see what he's like when he finally wakes up and realizes that he's in custody, in Moshi's custody. Also, I just know the next chapter because I see the title of it. It's one of my favorite chapters, and I'm so excited to get to it. So anyway, I hope you all enjoyed. Please let me know your thoughts and reactions in the comment section, and I will see you all next time. Well, Eineman.